Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for attending Inside Outside Politics, Independent Political Organizations and Governance. My name is Ryan Greenwood. I'll be moderating today. I'm a lecturer at Tisch College, Tufts University on sabbatical from People's Action. Huge thanks to the staff at Tisch College, Civic Life and Tufts University for sponsoring this panel and a series that we'll be doing on independent political organizations. And huge thanks to the panelists, Misty Rebik, who's the Chief of Staff for United States Senator Bernie Sanders, Natalia Salgado, who is the Director of Federal Affairs for the Working Families Party, and Illinois State Senator Robert Peters for their participation. We've also got a great crew of students at the Tisch College of Civic Life who are going to be going through questions from you all as participants and moving those to panelists. So thanks so much to that crew of students for your work. As I mentioned, my name is Ryan Greenwood. I'm on sabbatical from People's Action, which is a network of 40 community organizations from Maine to Los Angeles dedicated to racial, economic, and climate justice. I co-founded the Movement Politics program there, which has built independent political organizations across the country. And I'm on sabbatical with the Tisch College of Civic Life this fall, diving in with the staff and students here on independent political organizations, which we view as organizations who are not controlled by the two major political parties that are increasingly winning elections, electing their candidates to public office, moving issue agendas, and acting as powerful intermediaries between the general public and our government in this democracy. So we are going to be exploring independent political organizations as this growing class of organizations through both this panel and two that will be happening in January and February of 2022. And we've been exploring their why people form independent political organizations, everything from Tea Party patriots on the right to organizations like Mahente on the left, the decline of the two major political parties, the program of these independent political organizations, how they organize people, how they organize money, the legal regimen that governs them, and their relationships with candidates. As these organizations have been electing more leaders to public office, we're going to be diving into governance in this first panel. And so we'll be kicking it off today with three lectures from the three leaders within movement organizations and now in elected office that I mentioned previously. And then we'll be moving to Q&A. So if you've got a question for any of our three panelists, please use the Q&A function and we'll get to as many of those as possible to submit your question. Quick disclaimer, at the Tisch College of Civic Life, we're committed to hosting diverse leaders from all areas of civic life to engage in discussions with the Tufts University community and the general public. We embrace these conversations as an opportunity for reflection, growth, challenge, and change. Speakers offer their own views, ideas, and opinions, and we at Tufts University neither censor nor endorse those views. So to kick it off today, I'm going to welcome Natalia Salgado, who's the Director of Federal Affairs for the Working Families Party, which is both a political party that has existed for around 20 years and also an independent political organization. In addition to her role leading the federal affairs organizing at the Working Families Party, Natalia is treasurer of the Working Families Party PAC, vehicle for supporting and opposing candidates for federal office. So thank you so much, Misty, for joining us, and welcome to Tufts University Tisch College. Take it away.
Hey, everybody. This is Natalia Salgado. I am the Director of Federal Affairs for the WFP. I am also, my secondary title is Treasurer of the PAC. And I'll tell you why that's important in a second. So just to give you guys a little bit about me, I was born in Colombia, came here when I was 4 years old, started my career in Philadelphia as a social worker. And my career started actually in independent political work. I helped elect the first Latina to Philadelphia City Council. And she was someone that was completely out of the power of the Democratic political machine in Philly. If you know Philly at all, the Democratic political machine is very strong. And to have someone who is out there, attempting to come into power outside of that machine is a big deal. I didn't quite realize how big of a deal it was until I got much older and understood that we had taken on a really big monster and had won. So I'm proud to say that the city councilwoman that I started my career with is thriving in Philadelphia and possibly going to be running for the next mayor of Philadelphia. So that's where I come from. I come from a place of understanding independent political power very intimately and started my career there. Since then, I have worked for labor organizations like SEIU Local 32BJ, who represents all the people that clean or doormen up and down the Eastern Seaboard in major buildings. And I did that for 10 years. After that, I worked for Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, managing his politics from the inside. So I have done a little bit of a lot of it, right? So I've done the outside organizing, which is so critical, but I also have been on the inside and have helped people govern in the most progressive way possible. When I think about independent political power and the moment that we are in, I want to bring your attention to very much this week. This week, what we're seeing happen in DC, if you guys have been keeping up with your CNN or MSNBC or even picking up a paper, you know that we're in the middle of a really sort of historic fight. We have the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which, us on the Hill like to call the skinny infrastructure. And then we have the Build Back Better bill, which is the really sort of robust legislation that is really going to create so many safety nets for communities of color. It has a higher price tag and right now has been continually sort of whittled down by moderates. And so I feel like if you have been paying attention, you probably know a little bit about Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. But the story that some folks may not be paying attention to is what's happening in the House. So what we have in the House is the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And at the core of that caucus is folks that we all love and know, known as the Squad. This sort of progressive core of people have really been the ones attempting to ensure that that skinny infrastructure bill does not move unless we get the bigger Build Back Better. So this is a story of triumph and loss, so bear with me. So a couple weeks ago, the Squad that makes up the very core of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and remember who the Squad are. The Squad are those folks like AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, people that are very much outside of the conventional party candidate. They are not folks that came through any sort of machine. They are folks that had to fight against the Democratic machine to get into power. So they have come into Congress understanding that their base, Latino, Black folk, progressive white folks, are the people that they have to answer to. And so as they've come into Congress, they really have done the work to build up the Congressional Progressive Caucus that is being led by another progressive leader known as Pramila Jayapal. So what they did in the weeks leading up to the BIF versus the Build Back Better legislation is that they began to rally and organize a bloc. And as Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema attempted to stop us from trying to move Build Back Better, but advocating to move a skinny infrastructure bill through, They blocked them not once, but twice. And they also went head to head with Speaker Pelosi. I don't think this will surprise anybody, but Speaker Pelosi is a force to be reckoned with. And she has ran her house very efficiently, but folks have been known to fall in line when she makes the call. And the Progressive Caucus, these folks that have been elected through independent political power, were able to push back not once, but twice. Not once, but twice, which is a really big deal considering that you also had the President of the United States pushing, that you also had a crew of 10 moderates in the House also pushing against this. Those were the triumphs. Here's the loss. What we've had to come under, because her caucus and her bloc came under so much pressure from the president, from the speaker, from other moderates in Congress, they began to deteriorate. And so what we have now is that while we were able to get we have a written statement to get the Build Back Better legislation through, we had to move the BIF because our bloc just did not have enough people to back up the leadership of the squad and of Congresswoman Jayapal. And so I told you the treasurer part of my title was important, and it's because of this. Every electoral cycle, when we think of another person that we can add to our progressive bloc, that we can add to our squad that is elected through independent political power, that's just the more power we have once we are governing. Imagine if we had had 100 stalwarts in Congress ready to do whatever it takes. There is not a force from either the presidency or from the speaker's office or from the moderate corporate wing of the party that could have stopped it. And so it's important for us to make sure that we support our congressional members, our progressive congressional members, as much as possible. But every electoral cycle, we have to fight to get at least one or two more folks in and slowly build it cycle by cycle. So that's what I got. I'm happy and open to answer any and all questions. I know Misty's gonna probably talk about the Senate, but I hope I've given you a good taste about what's happening in the House.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Yes, and if folks have questions for Natalia and our other panelists, please submit them using the Q&A function, and we'll get to them as soon as many as possible after we work through the other speakers. So now I'd like to welcome Illinois State Senator Robert Peters. State Senator Peters represents a district on the south side, spanning the south side of Chicago. Prior to his role as an elected official in the state Senate, Senator Peters was a political director and leader within Reclaim Chicago and the People's Lobby, a independent political organization in that great state. And so welcome to Tisch College of Civic Life and Tufts University, Senator Peters, and take it away. Thanks so much.
Definitely. Thanks, Ryan. So yes, I'm Senator Peters. I represent the 13th district, which is in the city of Chicago along the lakefront. And let me sort of first start off by talking a bit how I got here and how I was able to get to this role. And I'm going to go back a little bit far in time to 1980s. I was born in 1985, and my biological mom was addicted to drugs and alcohol. And because of the system of tough on crime and because of our sort of carceral child welfare system, I was forced into adoption. And I was adopted by a civil rights lawyer for a father and a social worker for a mom, and was raised in the neighborhood of Hyde Park, which is famously known for being the home of Barack Obama. And I was born deaf, and I had a speech impediment. And I wasn't fully able to hear until I was about 6, 7 years old, and fully able to speak without that speech impediment until I was about 12. I struggled a lot in life. I struggled when it came to my place in the world because of my adoption. I struggled when it came to my disability. I struggled to be able to do well in school. and I often rebelled. And what got me through most of those struggles wasn't some, excuse my language here, BS bootstrapping, but it was actually the community. I had neighbors who had their doors open. I had friends who, I would be able to hang out with in the park, and that helped me sort of get settled and to grow and to develop in a strong sense of community. Now, with that, I often felt a sense of shame still, and I often blamed myself for things that turned out to be much bigger, a much bigger crisis in the world. And I ended up going to school in the middle of Kansas, and I came out during the Great Recession, and I couldn't find work. So I kind of got involved in politics, not really knowing what that is or what that meant. And I bounced from job to job, generally frustrated, not seeing the amount of change or amount of things needed to be done so that people like me didn't have to be put up for adoption, so that my biological mom could be given what she needed, or that my adopted mother, who struggled with alcoholism and mental health issues, got what she needed. And I had a sort of moment in my life that was very much a downer, but was also a driver. My dad, who was sort of my hero, he was a white Irish civil rights lawyer who took on police brutality cases. He once, argued in front of the Supreme Court, which was very bold, and to be honest with you, was a big risk for him. Had cancer. This is when I was 26, so I'm 37 now. And he passed away. And so I got hit with this sort of existential crisis. It led me to leave the sort of traditional politics and to disconnect from the idea of the career ladder climbing experience that often exists in our established politics. And I sort of hit a road of nihilism. And then a few things kept happening. It was like a cascading event in my late 20s that would lead me to joining, the political organizing, community organizing at Reclaim Chicago and the People's Lobby. First, my mom passed away from basically alcoholism, and because she didn't feel comfortable talking about her pain and her struggle. This is my adopted mother. She passed away with $300,000 of housing debt. This is after the Great Recession. So it was pretty upsetting to see my mom experience all that pain, to think about the pain that I went through in my life, think about the struggle my dad went through in his work, to think about the pain of someone I never got to meet in my biological mom. And then George Zimmerman got off for the murder of Trayvon Martin, which was a sort of a statement on how the current system is not necessarily, designed or built to protect us. And I decided to go into organizing, and I ended up joining the People's Lobby and Reclaim Chicago, where I became political director. And in that space, it opened me up to the understanding of power. And fundamentally, the way this world operates is in power. And power is a combination of things. It's organizing people, it's organizing money, it's organizing narrative. And I got a clear sense of the work ahead to be able to create the change that I wanted required power. And with that power, we worked to elect people at city council, at the county level. Kim Fox, who's the state's attorney in Cook County, we played a big role in that. And at state legislative races. At the same time, we worked on issues and issue campaigns and did direct action, door knocking, phone call, lobby days. And there was a campaign that I particularly took up, one that I found personally important to me, which was ending cash bail, which is at the intersection of race, class, and gender. And that in order for us to truly be on a path or a liberatory path, we need to end the system that says that there are tiers of who gets to have safety and dignity in this world. And so alongside countless other organizations, we started the End Money Bond Coalition. This would be in 2016. And so we started this coalition, and starting a coalition is not the easiest thing in the world, but we grinded it out. We found different organizations play different roles in order to build enough power to create enough change. We had organizations that worked on specifically electoral side. That was part of the role I played. Organizations that would mess you up with direct action. Those were other organizations such as the one I was at, and other organizations as well. We had policy organizations who could read the law and translate it into English because it was so difficult sometimes to understand. We had narrative organizations understood the media and being able to communicate to the public, the broader public outside of your base. And with all that combined, that coalition helped push me into becoming the state senator of the 13th district. And immediately I took on ending cash bail as my passion. That was the thing I wanted to get done as a state senator. And this was back in 2019 when I got into this role. This coalition has also put someone in to be the chief public defender for Cook County. So we always joke, me and him, that I was the first person on the fact sheet and he was the second person on the fact sheet. And because of this organization, because of the fact that it clearly understood the narrative fight, the grassroots organizing fight, the electoral fight, as I put it, the under the dome organizing, so that lobbying with a do-gooder lobbying crew of organizing legislators. We became the first state in the country to end cash bail. It is because of that coalition and because of organizing that I understood power and understood how things would operate under the dome, even though, to be very honest with you, when I first got here, I got hit with a wave of imposter syndrome. But I had people there who not only kept me accountable in the way of putting a ruler to hold me accountable, but also there was an accountability in making sure that they had my back, that there was a collective understanding that we're both in different positions of power. I'm in a position of governing power, they're increasingly in a position of people power. And what led us to being able to get this done was because there was a serious crisis in 2020. That crisis, when it came to the murders of George Floyd, or Breonna Taylor, and so many others before that, led to these huge uprisings and protests. And I was part of the Black Caucus, and we as a Black Caucus decided to come out with 4 pillars that were deeply rooted in legislation and policies that organizations have been fighting for years, for decades. And in those 4 pillars was the criminal justice pillar, which would be called the Safety Act, that would include a broad range of reforms, but particularly ending cash bail, which is where I had the most say and most control over. And then also during that time, I became the chair of the Senate Black Caucus. So we have a House Black Caucus, Senate Black Caucus, and what we call a Joint Black Caucus. And I became the chair of the Senate Black Caucus. And because of all those things in which there was a crisis and we needed to put out something visionary, because we have what is a rarity, a triple D state, Democratic Senate, Democratic House, Democratic governor, because of the organizing that pushed the governor to see ending cash bail as important, that put our people in positions of governing power years before this crisis, we were able to make history. And it would not have happened without the level of organization that existed, and the implementation of this won't happen without the level of organization that existed. And my ability to govern is truly connected to a movement politics. And when I think about the fights ahead, it's been a difficult 2021, and as much as it was a difficult 2020, and I think it's going to be an equally or more difficult 2022. Our best option, our best dam against any reactionary element here in Illinois is going to be because of the collective efforts of a movement, independent political organizing and operation alongside the people they put in governing power, standing firm to prevent any right-wing reaction. So that's a little background on who I am and what I do and what we've done here in Illinois. And I'm excited to have this conversation. So thank you, Ryan.
Thanks so much, Senator Peters, and congrats on the victory to end money bond in Illinois. If folks have questions for Senator Peters or Working Families Party's Natalia Salgado, please submit those during the Q&A function. We'll get to those questions after our final speech from Misty Rebik. Misty is the Chief of Staff for United States Senator Bernie Sanders. Prior to that role in our federal government, Misty was a lead staff on Senator Sanders' presidential campaign in 2020 and was the campaign manager for Kathy Glosson, who's a union leader in Iowa who ran for governor. And for years, Misty was a leader and organizer for Iowa CCI Action, a great independent political organization in Misty's home state of Iowa. So welcome to Tufts University Tisch College of Civic Life. Misty, take it away. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. And just let me thank Natalia and Senator Peters as well, because I hope you will recognize sort of a reoccurring theme here, which is personal narrative and a discussion about power. And I'm going to take us there too, as I begin my remarks. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I first became politicized, generally speaking. So let me just set the record straight. I'm a rural kid from Iowa. Grew up in a very blue collar working class family. Both my parents were factory workers. And I grew up out in the middle of nowhere out in the country, as we call it. But I first became interested in power and how power works through the workplace. My mother, now retired, was a meatpacking worker my whole life. And though she had a union, I saw firsthand how the company constantly and consistently worked to keep wages low, hours long, and expect workers on a regular basis to risk their health and safety. My mother herself, after working 30 plus years in the factory, had several surgeries done on her body and, had to fight the company the entire way to get the healthcare she needed to see those through. My mom also worked in mostly a space where there was mostly immigrant workers for a while, during the early 2000s. And even when Obama was president, we were experiencing constant workplace raids. And you may have heard about those in Iowa. There's a very famous one in Postville, Iowa. My mother and I both worked in Marshalltown, Iowa. But we saw firsthand, and my mother went through many raids where, immigrant workers were forcefully deported, separated from their families instantly. It was one thing to hear that from my own mother, but it was another to actually work there myself. So in my early 20s, I ended up working in the same factory that my mom had worked in and, worked in after that for many years. I had a little bit of a unique situation. I was a Spanish speaker, so I often found myself interpreting and translating between human resources staff and the employees. I myself went through the terrifying experience of having ICE show up at the factory. And that wasn't the only factory that I worked in. I ended up working in a window factory in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, after I got out of college. And again, I saw how workers were exploited, hurt in the workplace, then fired. Their wages were stolen by cutting minutes off of their clock in and clock out time. Pretty much every workplace violation you could see, I saw firsthand and experienced. I knew then I had to pick a side. I was a first generation college student. I had a little bit of a unique situation. I was college educated in these spaces. I was a Spanish speaker, so I was able to do a lot of interpreting and translating. But even then myself, I was not making enough money to even pay my own rent. So what I would do is I would work as a server and on the lunch shift, change in the bathroom, and then go to my other job at the factory where I was doing sort of this HR role. But I knew I had to pick a side. And so even though, I had some opportunities because I was college educated, I picked the side of the workers and I couldn't stand it. So I quit my job and I really went on to try to figure out a different way to work. And I wanted to, stand with the people like my own family and my parents and my mother. And so I became an organizer. And that's when I got involved with the independent political organization, Iowa CCI Action. I was hired as an organizer. I really didn't even know what an organizer was, but I quickly learned because I was taught about building independent political power for everyday people. I became trained by People's Action in Chicago, and I never looked back. I really discovered that organizing for me, and continues to be, a way of life, a view on the world. And frankly, once you take the blinders off, you can't unsee injustice, corruption, and political failure. So that philosophy, since when I was like 20 years old, which is more than 15 years ago now, really has shaped my entire journey. Believing that everyday people are powerful, they are the experts in their own lives and the issues that they deal with, and knowing that and being committed to that has driven basically every decision I've made since. And I started working with CCI. I went on and I founded a worker center in the state of Iowa, where we changed several policies locally, which was an independent organization, mostly led by immigrant workers. We raised the minimum wage. We passed a municipal ID campaign. We fought with workers against wage theft. I went on to work with Planned Parenthood, where we were under attack. I helped cover 6 clinics in rural Iowa where abortion rights were being under attack. I had to help shut down 3 clinics because we were defunded. So I was in that fight. And then, as you heard in my introduction, I started to dip my toe in electoral politics, and I helped Kathy Glosson, a union nurse and president, run for governor in the state of Iowa on a very progressive agenda, very similar to that of Bernie Sanders after his run in 2016. And I've, essentially just kind of been on this political train ever since. But I do not ever forget where I came from and what I believe in. And that is really, quite frankly, a lot easier to do in the world I'm in now at the US Senate, what I also call the swamp, when my boss and I are very aligned on our political views of how change and power happen. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that here for my remaining time. The transition from being an organizer in independent organizations to sort of inside the Beltway has been hard. I'm not going to lie to you. It's been different, right? I think, all the things that I knew when I was on the outside trying to organize and put pressure on Democrats and Republicans to stand with working people remain to be true. People here are deeply, deeply influenced by lobbyists. There's more than 1,200 pharmaceutical lobbyists running around, and having elected leaders who are truly politically independent in how they got here and what they believe in is more important than ever. And so, as we heard even from State Senator Roberts, and as Natalia took us through what the squad was able to do with the Progressive Caucus in the House, those people have been not only key to passing the American Rescue Plan, which happened in the spring, you may remember, led by, large in part, Senator Sanders as his role of the chairman of the Budget Committee through a process called the reconciliation process, which I'm not going to bore you on that. I can't answer some questions about it, but Chairman Sanders being in that position, coupling with the independent political thinkers we have on the House who got elected through small dollar donors rather than large donations through corporations, have been holding the line this entire year. We would not be here if it was not for the independent political organizations who've been working alongside elected officials like Senator Sanders and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Jayapal, all of these people that you've heard. And so, I just want to talk about how the American Rescue Plan was probably one of the most radical pieces of legislation that we had actually seen in the most recent decade. It was one of the few multi-trillion-dollar pieces of legislation that actually did not hand out money to corporations. We are talking about direct payments to families. We're talking about a child tax credit that actually deposits money into people's accounts on a monthly basis for their children. These are things that were unheard of 2 years ago, but were possible because of the constant pressure and power and lifting up of everyday working people voices in every state across the country, and also here in DC. And then, of course, you've been following, I'm sure, the news of the Build Back Better plan, which Natalia touched on in the beginning. And it has been quite the fight, right? So basically, there's this huge backlash that happened after we passed the American Rescue Plan, where very, very, very few, if you go through that line by line, like almost no money went to corporations and large bailouts for greedy corporations. There's just been this massive backlash, and lobbyists have been, working day in and day and night is what I'm trying to say, to get in their special interests into this Build Back Better plan. So you heard the president in the spring give his joint address, which included, community college. It included expanding pre-K, pre-kindergarten care for every single American, and many, many other ambitious proposals. And Bernie Sanders, as the chairman of the budget committee, went straight to work to put that into law. And so our budget committee worked to put out a reconciliation bill. It started at $6 trillion. And then they've already been mentioned once. These so-called moderate Democrats had a problem with that. So we went into negotiations and we came out with a $3.5 trillion plan that still was aggressive on climate change and still was going to deliver to working people. And essentially, since then, that would have been back in July, August, I think, is when we kind of came into agreement of this $3.5 trillion. We've been in stalemate. We haven't seen a lot of movement on this thing. Thankfully, we have had the congressional caucus members in the House holding the line, as you heard about the skinny infrastructure bill and trying to move these two together. But we have been dealing with a small number of Democrats in the Senate who do not want to invest in these ways. And I think it's really important to connect that with how these folks were elected. Senator Bernie Sanders, when he ran for president in 2015 and 2016, sort of revolutionized the way in which independent political people could run for office by small dollar donors. He didn't take one corporate dollar then, he doesn't now. Me as chief of staff, a lot of my colleagues spend time meeting with lobbyists and doing fundraisers. I don't do either of those things, right? The lobbyists who I'm meeting with are independent political organizers, people, groups and organizations like People's Action, Center for Popular Democracy, Working Families Party. I speak with Natalia on a regular basis. And the reason I bring that up is because that is quite unique, and the only way that we're going to continue to be able to hold the line on strong pieces of legislation like this is if we get more people like the squad members and like Senator Bernie Sanders elected. And let me just say, I know I'm a little over time here. I'll just finally say that this bill, the American Rescue Plan, the Build Back Better plan, as the president laid it out back in April, and we continue to fight for today, would have never been possible without independent political organizations who for decades have been doing that narrative fight that you heard Senator Peters talk about, the organizing fight, and talking about what is politically possible. And when we do that, that's how we actually change things. And I think the organizations who've been up, lobbying day in and day out, trying to get senators and Congress people to listen to working people have been doing an incredible job in almost impossible circumstances because we are outnumbered. But you don't give up. This work is hard. And that is what independent political organizing is all about, is taking on the tough fights because no one else will. And it's only up to us. No one's going to save us. We have to save ourselves. So that is a little bit of what I wanted to share. And I'll turn it back over to Ryan. I'm excited to hear some questions.
Fabulous. Thanks, Misty. And thanks for your insight into how independent political organizations are interacting with political power in Washington, D.C. Now we'll open it up to questions from both that were pre-submitted by attendees and questions that you all are submitting now. And I'll say to folks who are watching on YouTube or other platforms, to submit a question, you can go to the Tisch College of Civic Life website. It quickly allows you to register for the Zoom, and then we're taking questions on Zoom through the Q&A function. First, though, I'll kick off with a question for Senator Peters that was pre-submitted by an attendee, and that is, think about your leadership role, Senator Peters, at Reclaim Chicago or the People's Lobby, when working in a leadership role in an IPO, how does deliberative negotiation and compromise impact your work? So there's the goal of what you want, but there's the compromise and the negotiation. How does that impact your work leading an IPO and then as a IPO aligned state senator?
That is a big question. I mean, it depends on whether that let's say you're negotiating with an ally. I think it depends the extent to which what the hard line is, what the threat of that hard line could be. So when if you're negotiating with, and I think I'm answering this question, I hope I am, Ryan, but if you're negotiating with somebody and they're not really that much of an ally and there's some level of hostility, you, I think, might not be as flexible with your line in the sand or your, how do I describe as a state senator on the other side to somebody, the win, right, for that, and what will come after that than you will be with somebody if you're in a deeper relationship with them. I think that is, and I think you're kind of clear. Before you go into a meeting, you do a whole pre-meeting, you do a whole bunch of prep. You've hopefully done a lot of power mapping. Particularly for me as a political director, there's a lot of relationship building with a lot of people. And where your quote unquote win is going to be. So, you might start here at like your Cadillac, but you definitely know you don't want to be at the Pinto. And so I think that you play it on the relationship. I think the relationship is the most important piece here because if you have a strong relationship with somebody, they're going to be more likely to be honest to you, and B, they're going to be more likely to be clear about what's going on in the broader political space. And that's generally how I see it. I don't know if that really answered the question the best way I can.
It's interesting because I sort of hear you subdividing elected officials into people who are targets that you're trying to move and people who are collaborators with whom you're moving an agenda. And so I think developing different levels of...
There's people who are tweeners, right? There are people who are like, aren't that, who are like your tweener. I mean, and it's hard for me to talk about just as like the political director because, as the state senator now, I am sometimes someone's target as well as someone's collaborator. But I also try to talk to organizations as much as possible. And I would say when I'm telling people I am talking to, I can just tell from how they talk to me. Like I see the other side of it, which is when I am not the target, the firmness of the question, it changes. And I think, or the firmness of the negotiation changes. There's a sense of trust and I think I've seen on both sides. And so, I think that answers the question. I honestly, look at me, just really insightful pieces of stuff for everybody.
Thank you. Well, excellent. No, appreciate it, Senator Peters. And just to kind of extend this for a little bit, question for Misty that we got pre-submitted. So can you think of an example where this really works, where an independent political organization worked effectively with elected officials to actually move their shared agenda? And what were the factors that contributed to that success? Like, how did they engage together that made that actually work?
Yes, I've seen this work in a lot of different ways. And, one that comes to mind is the home care agenda, where all across the country, workers, domestic workers, the union SEIU, and many local and national organizations have rallied to try to fully fund Medicaid in a way that will actually pay home care workers for the money that they should be making when they're taking care of their loved ones, or if it's their job to go take care of someone with a disability, whatever it may be. I would say, how did it work? Is there is a large education campaign about what these workers' lives are like, how common it is for people to become a home worker during their life experience. Like 1 in 3 people will take care of someone in their life, and sort of demystifying what it means, and also just sort of exposing the horrifying like work conditions and how difficult that work can really be mentally and physically. And then obviously these are groups and organizations that worked really hard to build relationships, which is, the tenet of good organizing, building relationships with elected officials, ensuring that they understand those struggles, and then making very, very clear demands about what they needed to solve those, to begin to solve the crisis that we face in this country around that. So, initially, there was a lot of demands to include $400 billion in the Build Back Better plan to help begin to address this issue. And that is what it was slated at in the first 2 versions of that. It has gotten cut down, but it is still there. And I think it will be in this bill. I think it will land and be in this bill. Will it be the full funding that we need to really begin to fully tackle this problem? No, but it will be significant. And I think it will get us on the road in which we need to continue to get the full solution. That is a national example, but myself, when I was running the Worker Center back in Iowa, we successfully ran a campaign to raise the minimum wage. And it was mostly all immigrant workers who ran that campaign and put pressure on local city electeds at the city council level. And then also and we have board of supervisors, so county level officials as well in Iowa. And that was a 2-year ran campaign by a little worker center that had like less than 1,000 members and a budget of less than $200,000 and 1 staff person, and it was through constant community meetings, relationship building, pushing, not giving up, that we were able to win the ordinance. And so I have seen this work many times. We need a lot more of it, obviously, which is what we're talking about here. But I would say the things that make it the most successful is clearly lifting up the voices of people most directly affected. Those should be the people always leading the fight, telling their stories, helping to explain what is happening and why. Statistics are great, but I'm just going to tell you one thing. It doesn't change hearts and minds. And it's not, everyone's got the statistics. Everyone has the policy staff. Everybody has their economics. That doesn't change hearts and minds. It's real working people speaking up and telling their stories about what they're going through and what they need. And then having solutions very clear for elected officials. So drawing out for them what you need from them and how it could happen with multiple pathways, but go hard on your ideal scenario. Be ready to negotiate, but only when you absolutely have to. Do not negotiate with yourself. And then, of course, ongoing relationship building. So not only approaching elected officials or it goes both ways, organizations. When you need something, you need to be in an ongoing conversation, checking in, seeing how you can help each other, support each other, throwing each other bones here and there in terms of just showing up for each other and supporting each other. And that is really, really important because at the end of the day, all good organizing and politics is about relationships. We wanted to change what that looks like in terms of accountability for working people. We don't want that to be based on money and political elites, right? But we do need to build those relationships, and I think the most successful organizations do that.
Thank you, Misty. And yeah, 2 concepts I'm drawing for there. One is sort of in both your stories that independent political organizations can serve as like vehicles for if people, home care workers, minimum wage workers don't have the 1,200 lobbyists going around DC representing the pharmaceutical industry. They need organizations that can lean into their asymmetric advantage, which is people power over that kind of concentrated wealth. And then also I'm hearing, I think both in your example of a 2-way street of relationship between electeds, staff, and independent political organizations is that, yes, sometimes, as Senator Peters was saying, the elected official is a target. And sometimes they're a collaborator or somebody in between. And so you want to figure out how to move that relationship. And I guess just to go with another pre-submitted question to Natalia Salgado at Working Families Party, like the question is like, you're one person, like maybe there are a couple of others, but you're one person representing this organization that has members from California to Georgia. in DC. So how do you engage with your members of the Working Families Party in the organization's decision-making process? So you bring those voices into the room.
So we have, I think, a structure that I think very much allows for input from our membership to really sort of infiltrate all of the decision making for WFP. We have state chapters in a lot of the states where we have membership, and those state chapters have boards that are made up of those very same members. And so we have sort of baked into all of our decision making the ability to hear from folks on the ground. And I am in pretty tight coordination with all of our state chapter leaders and all of our regional directors. And that felt really, really essential to be able to differentiate what is happening, the sort of dynamics that are happening in one state versus another state, right? I think we've heard this before, so I apologize for the cliche, but all politics are local. And so what is happening in LA, it's a different thing that's happening in Brooklyn, is a different thing that's happening in Austin. And so for me, it is really, really critical that as I'm thinking of talking to congressional members, to senators, that I really get a sense from the folks that are on the ground, that are organizing from impacted communities, where are things at? Where are things at in that geography? And what are the dynamics I need to know that are going to help to influence my decision making? But it's baked in. We also have, just so you guys know, we have this wonderful monthly assembly where we pretty much give a download to our membership across the country around where things are with WFP and some of the projects that we're working on. Would love for Ryan, if he's able to, send it out to folks who have been on this call, and would love to see you guys on one soon.
Awesome. A great example of democracy in real life. And yeah, while Tisch College and Tufts University doesn't endorse any specific independent political organization, we do endorse people's involvement in this is not just about studying civic life, it's about the practice of it. And so we'll send out for Working Families Party and other IPOs information on how to get involved. So we're getting some great questions in the Q&A, and I want to combine two together, and I'm just going to open it up so whoever feels the spirit weigh in amongst our panelists. There's questions about like local versus state versus like national interventions. And I guess, you know, as kind of students were vetting through this, you know, what are the strategies and possibilities for growing independent political power, and how do they vary at those different levels of political office, local, state, and national? What do you all think?
I'm gonna just talk because I'm in the city of Chicago in Illinois, and so it's either federal or it's local, and then people are like, oh, Springfield, what a place. I just see like different dynamics for how people engage with politics on the local, state, and federal, because particularly if you're in the city. So I think, I can't speak for national. We have national people here who are going to speak for national stuff. But what I can say on the local and the state side that hits is generally if your largest city has a very active, particularly in this situation, Democratic voting base and Democratic organizing base, I often see people just get really focused on energy around the local side of politics. Like they'll show up in their city hall because it's a bus ride, a train ride away. The media covers the city activity because it's the largest media center where much of the politics are happening a lot. It's like city council like debates, you know, that will be about like, you know, dogs and bars get a whole bunch of attention. And then there's people like me, we're in Springfield. Now, what's so interesting is that a lot of progressive people, particularly progressive people, will be like, Chicago should do more progressive things. And we're in Springfield where the state of Illinois, and not, I guess I should actually take some credit. This is a thing I've been told I don't do enough of, where for me, I've carried a bunch of first in the country pieces of legislation, and then I will watch the same piece of legislation at the city that hasn't moved get so much attention, and I've just come to accept it. I've just said, this is just the way it's going to be. But they can actually impact so much change if people knew that things at the state level are actually like a great opportunity for organizing, and there's a gap. And so at least here in Illinois, local gets so much attention, even though it's extremely difficult. We have 50 city council members that they all fight. It's like always fighting. Just I can't. It's like the worst of high school. And meanwhile, at the state, we have a governor who's one of the most progressive and accomplished governors, I think, in the state. He's very clear and understands like having this broad coalition. So, he listens to the Progressive Caucus and listens to the Black and Latino caucuses pretty clearly. We have a triple D state. So we have a super majority in the Senate, super majority in the House. We're passing transformative pieces of legislation. And I just tell people, I know city council is a 15 to 30 minute ride away. And I know it gets a lot of press, but take the 3-hour drive, come to the Capitol, and you could seriously create more and more transformative change. And I think it's just bridging that distance divide as much as anything. So.
All right. So you take that drive to City Hall, to Springfield, to Washington, D.C. Last question is for, I'd love both Natalia and Misty to respond to, which is, what have you found to be the best points of leverage to influence legislators to adopt movement and people-powered demand? What are the best points of leverage?
Misty, I could just jump in first if you, okay. Everything becomes so much easier if you elect an organizer. If you elect an organizer, and I say this, we have some progressive folks who are amazing on the issues. I mean, they could write you a memo like God knows who, but when it comes to the hard skills of organizing, when it comes to having a case in theory around movement, that is harder and harder to find. And so on the front end, when we find candidates from the ground, ensuring that their point of view sort of aligns not just around the issues, but around the long trajectory of change, the very long trajectory of change, and they have a concept of how we build movement. It makes every sort of interaction that outside has with the inside so much easier. And then I think, we have been able to really ensure that impacted people are front and center of all of these fights. And I think that for those folks on the inside, it's important for them to have to be able to respond to people that truly are going to see their lives either improved or not improved by whether or not a piece of legislation moves. And I think that has always, to me, been a very compelling way to be able to move legislators.
Thanks, Natalia. All right. Misty, final word. What do you think?
I agree with everything that Natalia said. And I also will take a moment, because I'm a staffer, to talk about how important staff are, especially to newly elected, never done this before, independent organizer type of people. Having good, competent staff who understand what your boss wants to get done is so, so important. And, the reality is that we, at the federal level, at least, all senators and congressional people have a lot of staff who are kind of making decisions for them a lot on a day-to-day basis. So ensuring that our people, these people that we're talking about, everyone talks about running for office. Like, you should think about going to work for the people who we get elected, because they need good people. They need people who think like organizers. They need people who've gone through tough fights. They need people who understand negotiation. They need people who understand management. They need people and no one talks about that at all in the progressive movement. We all talk about, we got to get people elected. We got to get people elected. And even State Senator Peters said that, we're electing people who have everything stacked against them, everything. These are people who are put everything on the line. It's incredibly difficult to run for office. You lose all sense of privacy. You no longer own any time in your life. And they need good staff around them who can help protect them, remind them of who they are, help push their agenda, represent their interests, and help them stay accountable to their constituents. And so I just want to encourage students who are watching to not only be inspired to run for office. I think it's great to run for office, but a lot of work goes into supporting candidates, into supporting elected officials to make sure that they can be the best they need to be. And I just don't think there's a lot of talk about that. And frankly, when someone has bad staff, it's really hard to work with them. And it's hard to get things done with them, even if their boss is really aligned with mine. And I'm just going to be really clear about that. And that has been, for me, as I've moved from like the outside inside and learning all these dynamics, one of the most shocking things for me has been that just because a congressional person or a senator outwardly speaks great about an issue, if their staff are totally terrible and suck, you can't get anything done. And so, I just want to say that it's that, and then obviously repetition, man, just never giving up and repeating. My boss, I believe he's one of the best orators probably in recent history, and lots of memes and people made a lot of fun about how he never changes what he talks about. Well, yeah, that's right. And that's why people talk about Medicare expansion now. And that's why people talk about a $15 minimum wage, is because this is someone who just never let go of the drumbeat. And I think the more that we do that, the more we see minimum wage ordinances happening all across the country. The more that Natalia, what she was talking about in terms of local politics, the more that resonates up, right? And so I think local politics is the most important thing to affecting federal politics, frankly. But it's when we're united and we're like beating the same drumbeat that it really works. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Misty. And just huge appreciation first all to everyone who attended, both on Zoom, on YouTube, on the other media. I think we're in a place where we're contesting for and struggling for whether we're going to have a political democracy, an economic democracy. And so these conversations are part of how we think through these critical questions. Then huge thanks to our panelists, State Senator Robert Peters, Misty Rebik, Chief of Staff for Senator Sanders, and Working Families Party's Natalia Salgado. Huge thanks to the staff at Tisch College of Civic Life for help prepping and supporting this, Jess and Shanley, and to the team of students who helped do promotions and turn out. If folks were excited about what you heard today and want to send it to our friends, in addition to simultaneously streaming to YouTube, there's a recording of this conversation on the Tisch College of Civic Life's YouTube channel, and you can push it out to folks from there. Apologies to folks who, if we didn't get to your pre-submitted question or your question live, but thank you all so much for attending. We'll be doing 2 more of these events early next year in January and February, and so look forward to seeing folks again soon. Thanks all. Take care.